demonstration of the N-BMP tool, and N for nitrogen, BMP we use pretty broadly. That part of the term, including conversion of row crops to perennials and marginal lands and riparian lands and all. P-BMP would be the phosphorus companion tool. So if we take a look here at, this is the main spreadsheet, and there's a lot behind it, but we can run a scenario in a matter of a couple of minutes. We can pick a watershed, whatever watershed we want to work with in the state here, Huck 8 or a major basin. So if we just got the cottonwood selected there, we can then see that there's about 0.687 million acres, so 687,000 acres of cropland in that particular watershed. And these are the BMPs. So you've got nitrogen management BMPs for fertilizer efficiency. Then we've got wetland and other types of treatment for tile drainage waters here. And then below here are some of the living cover types of BMPs, cover crops and perennials. So we see, Seth talked about the suitability. So it shows for each of these BMPs what fraction of the cropland would be suitable for the BMP. Suitability takes into account where the BMPs are already existing. If we already have BMPs there, then that's not suitable. It looks at the slopes, the soils, the landscapes, the crops to determine which lands fit for the different BMPs. So in this case here, we can put in, let's say we're going to have optimal nitrogen rates on all the corn land, which would be about 51% in this watershed. We can hit the recalculate button, and it shows here that it would be about a 12.4% reduction expected in the surface waters for nitrogen, and a cost savings of about $3.2 million per year. But if we need more than that, if we need to get up closer to 20% reduction, we can look at other BMPs. So let's say we're going to put some restored wetlands, some constructed wetlands in here, and we want to do that on 50% of the suitable land. So we can do that, hit the recalculate button again, and now we're up to 15.2% nitrogen reduction. The cost of those wetlands is about $750,000 per year annualized cost, and those are net costs considering many different factors. And so that's a net cost of about $2.5 million when you include the fertilizer savings, or that's savings of $2.5 million. Now let's say, so we want to get a little closer. Yeah, let's say we want to put some cover crops on the short season, the early harvest crops, and we want to do that on 80% of those short season crops. So we do that, and we boost it up to 16%. So you get the idea. You can add BMPs, look at different scenarios, different adoption rates, real quickly get an estimate of the fraction reduction and the estimated cost. Now there's a lot more behind it. There's some graphic outputs, and there's much more detail in terms of the outputs, including pounds of reduction, not just percentage, and many other things that I'm not going to get into. But you can also change, let's say we wanted to look at a Huck 10. You can take the cottonwood and pick one of the Huck 10s and run the scenarios for the Huck 10 watersheds, the sub-watersheds within the Cottonwood River. Or if what we use for the nutrient reduction strategy a lot was the major basins. So you can look at the Mississippi Basin overall, every watershed that would contribute to the Mississippi, and you can run different scenarios for that and hit the recalculate button. Pretty similar to the cottonwood, 16.2% reduction. So that gives you, that's just my 2-minute, maybe 3-minute overview. We're going to switch to the slides now. Talk a little bit more about kind of how this going, why we developed this tool. And when I say we, I was on the planning team, but really who did the heavy lifting is Bill Lazarus, David Mulla, and Jake Belsky from the University of Minnesota. And we needed, well, let me back up. We were asked by the legislature to work on a study on nitrogen and surface waters to look at the conditions, the trends, the sources. We also wanted to add in a component for solutions. We didn't want to just look at problems, we wanted to look at solutions. So we went to the University of Minnesota and asked them if we could develop this tool for nitrogen that would allow us to run scenarios on the solutions, different BMPs, different adoption rates, and come up with estimated reductions and effectiveness of different efficiencies of different practices. So they did that. It seemed to work out pretty well. And when we were then working with Wayne Anderson and others on the nutrient reduction strategy, we also needed something for phosphorus. So then we went back to the university and said, can we do something similar, develop a tool like this for phosphorus? And so that would be the P-BMP tool, which came after the nitrogen. And now they combine them, so we do have a version of this where they're both combined on the same spreadsheet. Okay, so that's all background. We asked then everyone to show where it fits, and we put the N-BMP, P-BMP tools here in the RAPS kind of area, the restoration protection strategy, but it can also be used for local planning, the comprehensive watershed management plan. I have this slide at the end, but I put it up here in front, just the advantages and limitations. Advantages, it's ready to use statewide. We've had it for a while now. Just to the nitrogen part of it, more so than the phosphorus one that was more recently developed. It's real quick to run scenarios, as you just saw. It has a strong economic component. Bill Lazarus is an ag economist, and he built in each of the BMPs has a whole separate worksheet with an average of probably 30, 40 different variables, many of which can be changed. The assumptions, you can go in and change many of the assumptions, both for the economics and the effectiveness in reducing pollutants. It counts for the land that's not suitable for the BMPs. It adjusts for BMPs on overlapping lands where you're going to have, for example, riparian buffers and wetland construction. And sometimes you might say, well, the best land for the wetland construction is then the riparian buffer. And so what it does is it accounts for that and takes the least cost BMP and puts that as the top priority and uses that land first. You can quickly switch scales from statewide to basins to Huck 8s to Huck 10s. And it's particularly strong for nitrogen. And one of the reasons for that is nitrogen transport is predominantly through the subsurface, and this breaks apart the transport into the surface runoff, the tile drainage, and the groundwater transport. And so the BMPs apply, whichever BMP it is, it'll fit with the pathways that work with that BMP. I put Bill Lazarus as an advantage here. He's been very responsive as the needs arise. As you know from modeling, you start working with it and you see other needs, and Bill has been real good about making adjustments over time. Limitations, it only handles cropland. This is not an urban type of scenario model. It only deals with nitrogen, phosphorus, not sediment, except that sediment is inherently built in as part of the phosphorus reduction because so much of the phosphorus is transported with sediment, but it does not give you output for sediment. It does not account for in-stream attenuation like HSPF would. It does have a rather rudimentary way of accounting for groundwater denitrification en route from the field to the surface waters. It's not well suited for Huck 12 watersheds. That has to do with the talk by Bruce Wilson earlier on certainty and the smaller, some of these things average out with larger watersheds. With the smaller watershed you get, the less certain you are about those specific BMPs and their effects at that local small-scale level. There's a limited number of BMPs, 15 different BMPs, 12 main ones for nitrogen, and about 10 for phosphorus, and some of those overlap nitrogen and phosphorus. We don't have any ongoing funding to maintain it, and so some of the GIS information was 2009, 10, so that's definitely a limitation at this point. So if we look at these different tools, we've got certain tools that are better for identifying priority areas. This is not a comprehensive list, but some of the main ones. We have others that look at individual BMPs, and you can assess their, how good they might be. Also, we got the tools here for the multiple BMPs in a given watershed, and then placement, zeroing in, like we saw with the ACPF tool earlier. The N-BMP, P-BMP tools fit in these two areas. It's not a targeting tool. It's not a placement to BMP tool. It's more comparing best management practices and looking at scenarios of BMP adoption. So what I'm going to first talk about is the individual, as we look at individual BMPs and how the N-BMP tool is can help us with that. So here are a number of best management practices for nitrogen reduction, tend to fall into three areas: vegetative cover, tile water treatment, and fertilizer management. And these are field scale reductions, but often we're not looking for field scale reduction. We want to find out how much reduction can we get in a watershed if we adopt these BMPs at certain levels. And so in this case, 80% of the suitable lands for each of the BMPs were modeled using the N-BMP tool, and this shows you the results of that. And so it would help you figure out, well, if I had a high level of adoption of each of these BMPs, how far would we get? And if we're shooting for a 20% goal or a 30% reduction goal, you can see that any individual practice is not going to get close. But combined, we can reach some good goals. Now, the N-BMP tool also allows us to look at cover crops and break it out into the early harvest crops, which would get you about that far, aerial seeding, which would get you about that far because the seeds don't germinate so well, and drilled seeding, which would then get you to more like a 21% reduction. So you can look at things like that with the tool. Phosphorus reduction, here's the BMPs for phosphorus, and the same thing with the cover crops. We can split that apart and look at different applications of cover crops. I won't go into the findings of all these, but just to point out what the tool can do. Cost per pound of nitrogen reduced, comparing these BMPs. We can take a look at that and that's part of the decision in choosing BMPs. We can look at the cost per pound of phosphorus reduced, anywhere from cost savings, the negative bars here, to lower cost BMPs to a higher cost per pound of phosphorus reduced. But when we're looking at choosing BMPs, the effectiveness and the efficiency are part of what's looked at, but there's that important aspect of going to the users, going to the stakeholders, the farmers, and there they're going to want to look at some of these other things, like what are the other possible benefits of these practices, how well accepted are they, we'll find out, and what programs and support is available to assist with getting them implemented. So for multiple benefits, often we can't justify these BMPs on nitrogen alone or phosphorus alone, or even nitrogen and phosphorus combined. But when we start to look at sediment, pesticides, soil health, air quality, habitat, and groundwater, then that's when they start to seem more affordable. So as we look at the tool for multiple BMPs combined, we often have a goal, like here in the nutrient reduction strategy, to reduce by 20%. And so how many acres do we need of these different practices? And that's what we can use the tool for. And here for the nutrient reduction strategy shows a 20% reduction was achieved with this level in yellow, those BMPs adopted at those rates of adoption. And then I should point out that the right column is the acreages, so not just percentage, we want to know how many acres of each of these is needed. That would be it. Just a couple more examples and we'll wrap up. So the Puck 8, this is the Cannon River. They chose a different suite of BMPs to arrive at a 20% reduction. The Cannon River, let me just skip through those since I demonstrated it already. Here it shows the fact that we can break this down into hectares, but we don't go any lower than that. The price of corn makes a difference with some of these outputs and some of these BMPs, so that's one of the input variables is the price of corn. Here with $5 corn and optimal rates, we're getting a 11.7% reduction. With $3 corn, it's a 16% reduction. The lower priced corn means they're putting on lower rates to get that optimal rate. So this is what it looks like in the combined form, nitrogen and phosphorus combined. That's where we have BMPs that fit with both. Some of these overlap where you get a nitrogen and a phosphorus benefit. And so in conclusion, when to use these tools. They're good for strategies for state or basin planning or watersheds with the RAPs. It's a starting point to select BMPs, which ones should we be focusing on and emphasizing, get ballpark estimates of expected reductions, but I think it's more useful even for framing the thinking and trying to get your mind around what it's going to take to achieve certain reduction goals. It's good for when you've got a nutrient focus. It's good as we cross-check with other tools and models, and it has a strong economic component, so it's good for cost comparisons. And it's also, we found to be a tool that can be used for interactive stakeholder engagement, where you're working and say, hey, I want to try that BMP, so you plug it in and see what the effect is and add another BMP. So because it can be run so quickly for any given watershed. We do think that we're hopeful that some of these other tools that are more sophisticated will maybe make N-BMP less needed in the future, so that I don't think we need to keep adding more and more tools and models. I think some of these can be merged, and our thinking can be merged so that we can get the best of ideas and incorporate it into a few models. It's always good to have a couple different models for cross-checking and comparison. So my hope is, and I know it's already happened, as we've heard from Seth, that a lot of the thinking that went into the N-BMP, P-BMP is getting incorporated into some of these other tools. So with that, if there's any questions, please pass them along.